Welcome to Stealing from Wizards Volume 1, Pickpocketing, by R.A. Consul, read by the author. Chapter 15, Solstice. The principal paced back and forth in front of Kuro, tapping her fingers on her desk sharply as she passed. Kuro had been pulled out of evocations class and was sitting in a hard wooden chair in her office. She made several passes of Kuro, alternately scowling at and scrutinizing him as if she were hoping he would give up some kind of secret just from inspection. Her mood was so foul that it was sucking the warmth from the room. "Kuro!" She said his name as if it were an accusation. "I woke this morning to find that Sycamore Flint had penned a formal recommendation to excuse you from completing your assigned detention. Do you know how many times this has happened in the history of his tenure?" She did not wait for Kuro to respond. "Once! And it was because the student had broken both of their arms while carrying out his instructions." She paused, waiting for some admission of guilt from Kuro. However, Kuro wasn't sure what he was supposed to be guilty of. "Furthermore, Beatrice Crawley is asking why she has fully 24 more Dragonfey in her classroom than she did last night. And Gustave de Rigueur is asking permission to do a new class activity with the unfertilized eggs from a live Dragonfey queen that he has mysteriously come into the possession of." Kuro couldn't believe he was being scolded for helping. "Why don't you ask Mr. Flint? He was there." "I did." McCutcheon's fierce eyes seemed to cut right through him. "And the story he tells sounds more like the work of a talented high school student, not a bumbling freshman." "No, I just got lucky," Kuro pleaded. "I'm useless. Ask anyone. I can only cast 3 spells, and 2 of them always come out wrong. I'm not pretending." "One of them is a powerful offensive spell," she countered. "One that is not taught or used at this school." "I learned it by mistake, I swear." Kuro felt his eyes getting wet and his chest getting heavy from the injustice of the accusations. "I've heard of more thefts as well, with notes." She crossed her arms and pursed her lips as if she'd just brought down an inescapable trap over him. "They're fakes," shouted Kuro, tears starting to flow. "You think I'm smart enough to be a super secret wizard and stupid enough to steal from people and leave them notes telling them I did it? I can't be both, can I? And how am I supposed to steal anything? I'm always being watched. Everyone already thinks I'm a thief." McCutcheon considered him coldly for what felt like an eternity, her angry eyes seeming to peer into his soul. "Go," she said dispassionately. "You will be late for your next class." The meeting with McCutcheon changed nothing. His detentions remained, as did his reputation as a scoundrel. If anything, things worsened, as being called to the principal's office was never a good thing, and made for more variety in the gossip already surrounding Kuro. Saturday arrived slowly, but with it came a chance to really talk to his friends again. Kuro waited for them in a forgotten corner of the second inner library. He hoped that one of them could make more sense of the returning spell than he could. He hoped they would remember to come. He had taken out the book that Oganov had suggested and found the spell without issue, but it didn't make any sense. The instructions were so complex and foreign that he couldn't tell if it was just advanced or if he took out a German copy by mistake. Arthur was the first to arrive. He walked stiffly, eyes fixed on the floor in front of him. Kuro guessed that appearing incredibly anxious was Arthur's way to look nonchalant. "Hey," he whispered, not raising his eyes from the floor. "Hi," said Kuro, much more at ease. Kuro had made sure the area was empty before he sat down. Also, something about Arthur's awkwardness made Kuro feel more confident about his own lack of social grace. "How are you?" Kuro felt strange asking the boy who was supposed to be his roommate and friend, but they'd barely said more than "pass the squid ink" to each other in the past week. Arthur slowly relaxed, or relaxed as much as he ever did, and sat down. "I only have 2 notes so far," he said, a little ashamed. "How are you making out?" "I have a spell." Kuro pushed the book over to Arthur. "But I don't think I can cast it." Arthur looked it over and then turned the book the other way up just to check that he was reading it the right way round. Charlie and Marie also found their way to them eventually. Charlie crept through the library as though she was breaking into a high-security vault, sliding along bookshelves and ducking quickly around corners while walking on tiptoes. Marie just walked up, sat down, and waited for Charlie to finish her clandestine approach. Charlie had done no better than Arthur. She was too well known as Kuro's friend and was a terrible liar. Marie, on the other hand, had collected 7. Unlike Arthur and Charlie, who were only children, Marie had 4 brothers and sisters and had gone to a Blandlands public school. "Tricking other children is basically our national sport," she explained. "These wizard kids are clueless." None of them could make any sense of the spell. By the end of their meeting, they'd each gathered a small pile of reference books just trying to figure out what the words meant. They concluded that it was 1/3 Latin and 2/3 Gaelic. Eventually, they gave up and just spent the rest of the afternoon doing homework and talking. Kuro was finally able to tell them all the excitement of the week, from exploring the island to casting spells. At Charlie's insistence, he cast Grather on her. She could resist it pretty well, but even so, she couldn't help but gnaw on the remains of some maple jerky cookies from her backpack. He told them about the Dragon Fae and his adventures in the greenhouse. Charlie was enthralled and demanded that he embellish the stories more for her entertainment. Marie was scandalized that the staff would endanger a student so. Arthur was unsurprised at the whole thing and said his dad had told him stories about his detentions. "One time he had to clean out the Chateau de Printemps stable with a spoon and a toothbrush," he said earnestly. "He was a pretty bad student." As supper drew near, they started to clean up and separate, promising to meet back the next week with more notes and ideas. Kuro would keep working at the spell, though none were very hopeful about it. The weeks began to go by more quickly. Classes were still largely terrible, but he was getting used to the routine. Blow himself up in evocation, be ignored in alchemy, sing badly in music, not be able to hear Mr. Wittershins over the chatter of the class in social studies, spend hours listening to words he didn't understand in the 3 languages, and have his brain turned inside out in numerology. And sometimes actually do something right in spellcraft. Detention still happened, and even though Flint never mentioned the incident at the greenhouse again, or the note he had given to the principal, he only assigned small and relatively pleasant chores. One night, Kuro's task was to bring a case of Blandlands Cola to the Luton, who were so thrilled that they demanded he join them for its consumption. Dubois returned twice in the guise of the government orphan watcher, Mrs. Sabine LSR. He appeared for monthly checkups on Kuro, claiming it was to make sure he was doing well. Kuro was amused that Dubois would dress as a woman repeatedly, just to fail to get information out of him. Kuro also started to enjoy the cat and mouse game. Dubois would pose innocent-sounding questions, trying to trick Kuro into exposing secrets about his master, and Kuro would dance around them, providing evasive and unexpected answers. Dubois pried with questions about Kuro's parents and family. Kuro responded with stories about his cat and Father John. Dubois came at him sideways with questions about how he learned to read and what kind of education he had. Kuro said he'd learned everything he knew from the Sealy Times. That elicited a brief look of distress from the disguised Dubois. Kuro's favorite question was when Dubois asked him about his heroes. "I suppose I should say it's someone like Talon Dubois," Kuro started. "He's supposed to be powerful and all that, but if he were really that great, he'd have found the summer air by now." Kuro knew that was a sore spot for Dubois. The paper talked about it a lot. Kuro enjoyed watching Dubois try to maintain his composure and stay in character as Sabine after that one. He pretended to adjust his headscarf and shuffled through some papers uncomfortably. It was delightful. Dubois asked some other, much crueler questions as well. Kuro wasn't sure that Dubois knew that they were mean. They seemed like they were meant to be innocuous filler. Maybe to make Kuro feel safe and confident. Things like, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" and "What do you wish people thought of you?" Kuro had never really thought about the future. His greatest hope when he lived on the streets was that he would still be alive when he grew up, and had never wanted anyone to think anything of him. It was safer that way. Now, though, the ideas of having friends, a family, and a home seemed possible, and it haunted him. Did he really deserve any of them? Would he ever be able to escape his life as a thief? Could he ever be anything more than a servant? Kuro didn't really believe any of it could happen. But now that the ideas had taken hold, they started to eat away at him. The worst question, though, came at the end of their meeting in December. "If I could cast a spell and make all of your problems go away," Dubois asked in his badly faked Arabic accent, "where would you most like to be?" Kuro knew the answer in his heart, but he refused to say it out loud. He just stared back at the warm, pretty smile and kind golden eyes Dubois was faking. He had won. Kuro had to concede. The place that Kuro wanted to be more than anywhere else in the world was right there, at Avalon. He didn't even need Dubois to magic away his problems. Even with half the school treating him like a psychotic thief, Kuro was still happier at Avalon than he had ever been in his whole life. He hadn't even known what it meant to be happy until he'd come. He loved the lodge with its weird food and warm fires and his soft bunk bed. He loved the island, how there were always new places to find, and the barren Blandland side with its warden and her unpleasant tea. He liked learning, even if it was hard and he kept messing up. He even liked some of the teachers, especially Ms. Crawley. He thought he might even miss Mr. Flint if he had to go. More than anything, he loved his friends, Marie, Charlie, and Arthur. The idea of having to leave them and be alone again hurt his chest. "You don't have to answer right away," said Dubois. "It's just something to think on." Dubois, in his gray uniform jacket and matching lavender dress and scar-covering headscarf, patted Kuro on the shoulder, told him that he'd be back in January to check up on him, and left him to his tortured thoughts. Still stewing over the fear of losing his friends, he went to dinner where those feelings were further abused. Meredith interrupted dinner to announce the details of the holidays, where Kuro would be all but abandoned. "The ferry is leaving on December 18th. It comes back on January 1st. Anyone going home for the holidays needs to fill out the forms that are being passed around now and get signed by your parents, or you'll be stuck here. So get them to the Luton to be delivered before it's too late." From that moment on, nobody spoke about anything but Solstice break. Kuro felt like the only one that was still paying attention in class. Even the teachers mostly gave up on teaching new materials and turned to seasonal filler. The halls were buzzing with talk of presents and candy and debates as to whether Santa Claus visited the children in the Blandlands. Kuro was constantly reminded of just how alone he really was. Kuro's friends tried to be sympathetic, but they couldn't contain their excitement. Charlie rambled endlessly about all the animals on the farm that she missed. She worried about the old nag of a unicorn that had faded from white to gray, and she desperately wanted to see the chimera cub that had just hatched. Marie was excited to see her family. She missed her brothers and sisters very much, but she worried often about how to explain what she was doing at Avalon. Her siblings would all want to go back with her, but they weren't magical and all too young anyway. Arthur thought that Solstice was the best time of the whole year. He almost vibrated with anticipation at going to see his parents and sister and promised to send presents. Apparently, his family were just as eager because he was sent home on a special trip a day before anyone else. By breakfast on the 18th, Kuro was feeling very abandoned indeed. He had always spent Solstice alone. Even Phineas had found places to be on Solstice Day. But now that he had people to miss, it would be much more lonesome. Almost everyone was in warm traveling clothes, ready for the trip across the now frozen bay. The strong prow of the ferry could break through the ice, but it was expected to be a cold and bumpy ride. His friends were being as apologetic as they could, but their warm holiday wishes just made him want them to stay more. After a hearty breakfast of sweet potato pancakes with apple butter and pickles, Kuro saw off his friends. He wanted to walk down to the docks with them, but in an effort to maintain their ruse of unfriendliness, he kept his distance. He watched Charlie and Marie board the boat from the lot where the sleds and cars and carriages of the other residences were dropping off their students. It wasn't only students boarding either. Most of the teachers, as well as footmen, maids, and staff from the other residences were leaving. He was just turning to walk back to the lodge when Evelyn decided to stop by. She had dismounted from one of the elegant chateau carriages, followed by her ever-rotating entourage. Never wanting to miss an opportunity to point out her superiority, she paused to offer her form of holiday wishes. "Oh, it must be so hard for a stray dog at Solstice. Nobody to love you, no presents at all. Her voice was dripping with condescension. Her simpering followers laughed and pushed past him roughly. Far from deepening Kuro's self-pity and loneliness, Evelyn's derision improved Kuro's mood considerably. For one thing, it reminded him that she would be gone for nearly 2 glorious weeks, a blessing in itself. More than that, though, Kuro hated the idea of her being right and decided to enjoy himself over the holidays. Head held high, or as high as he could as he was very small, he marched strongly back to his home in Autumn Lodge. The lodge was almost completely empty. Less than a dozen students were still there. To his delight, he found that Meredith Thrump had stayed. Even after finding out he was a thief, Meredith had done her best to protect him. "Nobody's perfect," she said, and few were willing to disagree with her in her presence. Kuro spent that first day just running and climbing by himself. With no other students to get in the way, the grounds were his to explore. His many nights with Flint had taught him some of the several hidden passages through the school, and he aimed to find all of them before the other students returned. He arrived at supper that day, dirty, sweaty, out of breath, and utterly satisfied. He hopped happily into the lodge and tripped over himself when he saw what had happened to it. There was a pine tree in the middle of the room so large that its top branches pressed against the ceiling. It was decorated from top to bottom with glittering glass orbs of every color. Enchanted icicles hung from the branches and silk garland crisscrossed strings of popcorn, which glittering fairies that nestled amongst the needles munched on. While the tree dominated the space, it was by no means the only change. Several tables had been replaced with a huge candle holder with 8 extra arms. Only 2 of the candles, each as big as Kuro, had been lit. Holly leaves and cedar boughs hung from every rafter. An unreasonably large log had been shoved into the central fireplace and was slowly starting to smolder away. A goat skull with ivy entangled in its horns hung over a gingerbread house large enough for Kuro to sleep in. Candy canes were placed in the corners of pentagrams. Wreaths of oranges and pomegranates adorned the doors. Margaret the bear had bells and ribbons wrapped around her, and she munched lazily on a pile of watermelons. The Luton, who had obviously enacted this miraculous and baffling display, argued gleefully with each other as they continued their festive decorating. They were all in great disagreement about how exactly humans celebrated Solstice, and their solution was to include everything they had ever heard of. Most of the tables had been removed to make space, and everyone was eating at one long central table. It wasn't just Autumn Lodgers either. The very few students left behind in the other residences joined them, as did the remaining teachers. Kuro crept in and took a seat beside Meredith, who welcomed him heartily and filled his plate with roast chicken in spinach whipped cream. There was only one other student that Kuro knew at the table, and she was as unhappy to see him as he was to see her. It was Bella. She was engaged in a conversation with a Wertheim boy, but she shot Kuro a very dirty look when he sat down. Kuro had made a point of avoiding her since their fight in the woods. This was the first time he had seen her up close since then. There was a thin scar on her cheek and eyebrow where the rock had cut. When she turned to face him, he saw that the wound had gone much deeper. Her hazel eye had been slashed from bottom to top, and while her eye had been fixed by the nurse, the iris had not healed cleanly. It looked like she had replaced her eye with one from a cat. Kuro felt very guilty about scarring her in his panic. He stared fixedly at his food for the rest of dinner. It was strange being at a table with the teachers. They chatted casually and reminisced about past years and called each other by their first names. It was strangely unsettling to listen to Ms. Crawley and Mr. Oganov call each other Beatrice and Stan, while laughing about old students and telling Mr. Wittershin stories from past years, as it was his first year teaching. They seemed almost human. Kuro retreated the moment it was polite to do so and went to his dorm. It had been months since he had been able to sleep in his own bed. With most of the other students gone, though, there wasn't much opposition to him entering the dorms. He nestled into his warm, soft bed and had a truly peaceful sleep. The second day started much as the first, but he knew that he couldn't spend the whole vacation playing. He was behind in every single class except alchemy, and he had made no progress at all in the returning spell. After a quiet afternoon spent in the library struggling with an essay on the Treaty of Confederation of the Four Courts for social studies, he went down for dinner. He was expecting much the same as the night before, but upon entering the dining hall, he was tackled and thrown backwards into the wall. "Kuro!" the assailant shouted. "I was looking everywhere for you." It was Charlie. Kuro stared up at her, dumbstruck. He couldn't express how happy he was to see her, or how confused he was at her presence. Charlie, true to form, did not make him wait long. "I got all the way to the docks on the other side, and Dad had sent a message that there was a huge snowstorm and he couldn't come get me. He's a stray, right? So he has to take a truck. Well, I guess he could have rode a unicorn or something, but we don't have one that could carry both of us and my stuff. And they can stand on top of the snow on their own, but not with riders. So he had to take a truck, but he couldn't because of the snow. Anyway, I had to wait for the next day when the ferry could to make a special trip and then come all the way back here. And there were only 2 people on the ferry and it was really boring, but I had a pretty good book to read. But I couldn't turn the pages outside the veil, so that was no good. I tried to find you when I got here, but you weren't around. But now you're here, so that's fine. So guess what? I'm staying here for Solstice. Isn't that great?" She spoke so fast that Kuro had to play it back to himself more slowly in his mind to understand it all. Once he realized what she was saying, he threw his arms around her in a tight hug without even thinking. He knew that he should be sorry that she wouldn't be able to spend her holiday with her dad, but having Charlie around was probably the best present anyone could have given him. That evening, hiding behind the enormous tree in the lodge lounge, they set about learning the returning spell in earnest. After several hours, they hadn't gotten much past the starting gesture for how to hold their right hand. They were about to give up for the night when Meredith wandered past and took an interest in their activities. "Oh, what are you 2 up to?" she asked in her usual boisterous way. "Nothing," replied Charlie, much too quickly, while slamming the book shut. Meredith, while being very kind and protective of her first-year charges, was also no fool. She tromped over and grabbed the book they were working from. Charlie and Kuro waited nervously as they watched Meredith's brow furrow and twist. "Oh, that's a tricky bit of magic for a first year. What do you want this for?" Charlie started making up very bad and unbelievable excuses, but Kuro had another idea. If anyone was going to help them, it would be Meredith. Also, she was a high school sophomore. She could probably cast the spell in her sleep. Maybe she could teach them to do it. After a few tries, Kuro managed to stop Charlie explaining how she had accidentally bought a magical lamp with a genie inside back with her on the ferry, and how they needed to return it to its rightful owner before the genie got angry. He started to explain the truth. As he spoke, Meredith's usually bright, jagged grin fell and her eyes grew dark. When he got to the part about Bella forging a note to mark Kuro as a thief, she exploded. "She did what?" Meredith bellowed loudly enough to rattle windows. "Kuro, come with me!" Meredith grabbed Kuro's arm and dragged him out of the lodge. "Where are we going?" he asked. "To visit a friend," she growled, pulling him through the darkened autumn woods towards summer. Kuro wanted to protest, but Meredith's determined fury kept him quiet as he tripped along behind her, stuck firmly in her strong grip. She pulled him all the way up to the Summerhill residence. She stomped up the intricately interlocking stone pathway and slammed open the massive wooden front door as if it were cardboard. The noise echoed through the expansive entry of the nearly abandoned manor. Summerhill was nothing like the warm, welcoming cabin of Autumn Lodge. The entry hall had spotless marble floors and soaring arched ceilings. Every surface was crafted by a master woodworker's hand, stained dark brown and polished to a mirror's shine. Tapestries and paintings hung on every wall, showing great scenes of glory from dragon slaying to battles with troll armies. Great golden candelabras and chandeliers lit the halls with warm lights. As beautiful as it was, it felt hollow, sterile. Kuro was afraid to touch anything for fear of leaving fingerprints. He hesitated to even walk on the floor and risk ruining the perfect mirror finish. "Are we supposed to be in here?" he asked meekly. Perhaps he was too quiet, as Meredith did not respond nor show any sign of reservations that Kuro had. She pulled him along the marble corridor to a grand gilded set of double doors. Meredith pounded on them and yelled, "Belladonna, get out here!" The doors swung open a few minutes later, with Belladonna behind it, wearing an expression of annoyance. "What's with the racket, meh?" Bella asked before she saw the boiling rage in Meredith's eyes and noticed Kuro, half hidden behind her. Bella's eyes went wide and she slammed the door. "Don't you dare!" Meredith snarled. "You talk to me or you talk to McCutcheon. Your choice!" The door slowly opened a couple of inches, and Bella looked out at them with her scarred eye. "What do you want, Thrump?" Bella asked, saying her name like a curse word. "I want you to explain to me why, exactly, truthfully, you are not on the lacrosse team this year." Meredith's eyes had narrowed murderously. "Didn't he tell you?" "I want you to tell me." Meredith stood back, crossed her arms, and waited. "Casting dangerous spells without supervision," responded Bella coldly. "That's it," replied Meredith, even more icily. "Nothing to do with burgling a nice old man's shop?" The two older girls glared daggers at each other for a long time, and Kuro desperately wished to be somewhere else. It looked like either one of them could explode at any moment. Bella started in a hushed tone. "Lowndes said he'd keep that a secret. No one was done. Shoes went back. Shopkeeper forgave us. It's just a stupid mistake. Then this monster shows up at school, probably telling everyone." "Tonight was the first I'd heard of it," replied Meredith. Their voices started to rise, like a slow-burning fuse. "He got me arrested." "You did that yourself." "He attacked me." "He's 12." "He's a menace." "You framed him." "He deserved it. Look what he did to my eye." "In self-defense?" Their voices were cracking and echoing down the empty corridors. Candles sputtered, and the air temperature rose and fell sharply as their powerful thoughts interacted with the magical field. Kuro couldn't believe that anyone could get this angry on his behalf. He couldn't even get this angry on his behalf. "He's a thief!" shouted Bella. "So are you!" thundered Meredith. "You don't understand. You don't know what it's like to be surrounded by rich kids and be laughed at just because you can't afford fancy clothes and magic brooms. You think that I don't know what it's like to be the butt of jokes?" A pair of nearby candelabras toppled from the force of Meredith's anger. "He got me kicked off the lacrosse team. It's his fault. It's the only thing I've ever been good at, and he ruined it." "He's one of us, Bella. One of us." "Seth broke up with me." "Not his fault." Tears were streaming down both girls' cheeks, and their voices had turned very cold. "I thought better of you, Belladonna." "I thought we were friends, Thrump." "So did I." The waves of undirected emotion that had been causing havoc through the hallway stopped, and the air grew cold and still. Both girls raised their hands at each other and began to mutter spells. Kuro didn't want this. He didn't want anyone to get in trouble or get hurt or killed. He grabbed onto Meredith's wrist with both hands, trying to stop her attack. He was little more than a nuisance to the huge girl. He dangled helplessly from her arm. "Please don't, not again," he pleaded. "I'm sorry, Bella." He waited for the spells to start flying, but the girls just stood, frozen halfway through casting, tears flowing openly. "You're sorry? You are sorry?" Bella choked on her tears and anger. Slowly, she lowered her hands and hung her head in defeat. "You made your point, Thrump. Go. Please. Go." Thank you for listening to Stealing from Wizards. If you liked our show, please consider rating or reviewing on iTunes. If you want to support this podcast or just can't wait for the next chapter, the full book is available on Amazon, Kobo, and Indigo. Our theme music was written by Camille Saint-Saëns, transcribed by Franz Liszt, performed by Rebecca Verdun, and used with permission. This episode was produced by Jim Tigwell.